let's go into our teaching and practice. Um, so it's funny when when one both hosts and teaches, I always feel like I want to hand it off to myself. So I'm handing it off to myself, and now offer a brief teaching before we sit together. Andrew, if you don't mind, can you please share the PDF? And there'll also be a link in the chat if you want to access this document on your own and download it. We are beginning this week reading from Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy, which is the fifth of the books of the five books of the Torah. And there's some really, this book is different. Each one of the five books of the Torah has a unique quality to it. But Devarim, Deuteronomy, has its own kind of quality, and specifically related to what it is. And the setting for this book is that the Israelites are encamped just opposite the Arava in what's now southern Israel, about to come into the land after 40 years of wandering in the wilderness, really going in almost like a big circle, a distance that they could have, if they went straight from Sinai, it would have been something like 11 days of walking to where they end up after 40 years. But of course, the journey in the wilderness is essential. But now they're preparing to go into the land, and Moshe, their leader, is giving a final discourse to prepare the people for coming into the land and building a new society. And it's different than the society that experienced Mount Sinai and the wanderings in the wilderness, but it's people who are coming into sovereignty and an ability to build their own society. Rabbi Jonathan Sachs has some beautiful teachings on this parsha, or on this book of the Torah, as he does really on all of the Torah. And I'm inspired by something that he mentions in the overview to Sefer Devarim, so the whole book of Deuteronomy, in his book Covenant and Conversation, which you can see it here. Really highly recommend it. And his introductions to his works are often especially profound, I find it in my experience, because he was tremendously gifted at pulling out big themes. And so, as we all know, if we're deep into the details of something, there are beautiful things to find. And also, when we take a step back and look at a whole work from a place of broader perspective, sometimes different themes come out that maybe may offer us a different insight into how we might understand not just the text, but really bring these words alive and bring them into our practice. And of course, that's what we're doing here together. And so I want to share these what Rabbi Sachs identifies as the 5 key terms of Sefer Devarim. And there are a few things I noticed about these from the perspective of our practice. So I just want to share these ideas briefly, and then we'll kind of bring it in to how we might practice with these qualities. But I find this really amazing. So again, Moses, is really intentionally trying to frame all of the history of the Israelites for this new generation that's about to go into the land. And he's really intentional in how he talks about what has happened and what are the key terms. And those terms are intended to become essential qualities that people bring into their lives as they're building this new society. So they're really excellent for us as well in terms of insights and orientations that we might bring into our practice, and really how we are building our lives as we are in the real world, not being led around the wilderness by a cloud during the day and a pillar of fire at night, but rather we are finding our way through our lives and building our lives. So these are 5 pillars, perhaps is a way we can think of them, that we might rely on in building these lives. So number 1 of these 5 things is, and these are key terms that occur in Sefer Devarim. Number 1 is listen. In Hebrew, Shema. And of course, the most famous instance of the use of the Shema will occur in next week's Torah portion, Va'et Hanan. But actually, this word Shema, which Rabbi Sachs identifies as the most important word of the book of Deuteronomy, occurs 92 times, which is an exceptionally large number of times for this word to occur. Much more than the number of times that it occurs throughout the rest of the Torah. And Rabbi Sachs says that this is because listening and Shema, which can also mean understanding, is really at the heart of the society that the Israelites are building, right? As opposed to a number of other Hebrew words which we have, which mean more like obey, Shema is used over and over again, which is really connecting the ideas of listening and understanding. And it's really underlining the orientation of listening listening being at the core of our spiritual lives. And this is a listening that then leads into understanding. So that's the first one. I just want to bracket it. There's, of course, a lot more to say about it. We'll come back to it in a moment. The second term is love. This term, ahava, occurs very few times in the other books of the Torah. Even in the book of Numbers, it doesn't appear even once. And I think it occurs once or twice in the book of Leviticus, and very few times in Bereshit and Shemot. But in Sefer Devarim, we have it 23 times. And for the most part, love in this book is about receiving and feeling divine love, and then also about having an orientation of love towards the divine and really towards the world. So that's the second term, ahava. Again, we'll come back to that in a moment. The third term is simcha, joy. Simcha occurs one time in each of the other 4 books of the Torah, but 12 times in the book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy. Really to underline the essential role that joy plays in our spiritual lives. As Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel said, I love how he says this, and it's so Hasidic. He says that part of what we're doing is sensing the divine significance of human happiness, meaning feeling joy in our lives is not like a good if you can find it kind of thing, but it's really at the core of our spiritual lives. And of course, as you know, we talk about in this practice, quality of joy, especially one that we're practicing with in our mindfulness practice, is not typically a kind of wild exuberance, but more of a subtle experience of joy, an experience of joy that is can be found simply by being present with what we're experiencing. We're not to say that we're always feeling that, but we're actively trying to cultivate that quality of joy, and we're orienting ourselves to the best of our ability towards our moment-to-moment experience with joy. Okay, so those are the first 3, and I'm going to return back to those in a second. But just to honor Rabbi Sachs's system here with these 5 key terms, there are another 2 that if we had a lot more time, I would love to dig into them. They're also really relevant to our practice. But the fourth one he terms as remembering, not forgetting. One example of this from Deuteronomy is Zachor al tishkach, remember, do not forget. This kind of formulation that remembering what happened in the past is an essential part of building one's new society. In building a life, you have to remember. And of course, remembering is orienting towards the past, but the actual remembering is taking place in the present. So that's the fourth kind of key term, key pillar of practice coming from Sefer Devarim. And then the fifth one is about handing on of memory and identity, which is future oriented. As we have, in the Ve'ahavta, Vishinantam Livanecha V'dibarta bam. Teach them to your children and say these words to them. Right? This idea of taking our wisdom, our experience, and sharing it actively is a really future-oriented kind of thing. But again, it's taking place in the present when we're doing this teaching and instructing. So I kind of tipped my hand a little bit that one of the things I noticed when looking at this system of 5 practices or 5 key terms is that the first 3 are really present tense. They're about how we're orienting ourselves to this moment. And then 4 and 5 also, they occur in the present, but one is about how we orient to the past, and one is about how we're orienting towards the future. But I want to take for our cue for our practice today, really these first 3 qualities, and to practice with them, which means to try them on for size, to experiment in what it might feel like for 12 minutes or so to be orienting ourselves towards our lived experience with these qualities of being. One way to think about this is to think about it as listening as our kind of primary orientation in our practice, meaning I'm receptive and open to what's happening, and I'm not trying to figure out and solve the things I'm hearing, or both from outside and the things I'm hearing from inside, but rather I'm witnessing it. I'm bearing witness to what's unfolding moment to moment. And then how do I do that? With these next 2 qualities of love and joy. So what might it be like to listen and bear witness to what's unfolding moment by moment as we sit here together, wherever in the world we are, whatever has happened in the moments and hours and days and years leading up to this very present moment, as it continues to unfold, can we bear witness to it, listen to it with a heart inclined towards love, warmth, kind of kindness and generosity of spirit, and also with perhaps a subtle kind of joy, especially as we're going into Shabbat. It's beautiful to be cultivating this quality of joy, even in a very subtle way. What a beautiful thing to be alive right now, to experience the joy of this human life exactly as it is, knowing that we always wish things could be different. There's so much brokenness, but to see if we can, in our practice, really dig deep down and sort of double down on on deepening our capacity to be present and alive with these qualities. So enough from me. Andrew, thanks. You can stop the share. I'd love to sit now. I'll ring a bell at the beginning and then at the end of our period. And again, to see if we can just take our cue from Sefer Devarim, which we are going into, to listen and hold our experience, witness our experience with love and with joy. Foundations of building a life. Thank you. As always, we seal our practice with Kaddish Atom, the Mourner's Kaddish. So if you'd like to unmute yourself, and we'll read together these ancient words of mourning. Yitkadal
Yikadash
v'Yirabash Rabba
Yerabah
Yamal V'Echon Yisrael V'Yala V'Zman Yirbu Amen. Shmei Rabba Baruch
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Andrew, for your tech help, and also thank you for to all of you who posted. I didn't say it, but you knew to do it. Names of people who you're holding in your heart, who you're remembering today. So thank you. Their memories are truly a blessing. Really grateful to everybody for being with us today. We'll be back Monday at 12:30. If anybody would like to stick around for another 15 minutes, if you have any questions or comments or observations you'd like to share from our session today, please feel free to post them in the chat. It's helpful if you write question in all caps so I can see it easily. But again, thanks so much, and if you'd like to stick around, please do so. Have a Shabbat Shalom to those of you who are leaving us now. Great. Beautiful. So I see a question from my friend Harris. Great to see you, Harris, as always. Is there a linguistic connection between the roots of shame and simcha? Interesting. If so, does it also suggest a conceptual and practical link as well? I don't think so. You're saying the English word shame? Here, wait, let me unmute you. Or ask you to unmute.
It was auto-corrected. It was supposed to be Shema.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
No, they're not connected, but as one of my teachers used to say, that, that didn't always stop the rabbis from connecting words, even if they're not necessarily, linguistically connected, and drawing meaning from it. So listen, the root of that is Shema, Shin Mem Ayin, and joy is actually sin. It looks the same, but sin, Mem Chet. So similar but different, but a beautiful connection to joy, to connecting, listening and joy. I think for sure, Jonathan Sachs would say both of these are part of building. I didn't use the language earlier, but he really thinks of it as a covenantal society. So the idea is you're not just a collection of people who happen to be together, but you're connected with one another. You're in a covenant together. You're responsible for one another. You're taking care of one another. And we're really endeavoring to bring holiness and our highest sense of how to live into our lives and into the world we're building. So, and Sachs talks about how these 5 key terms of Deuteronomy are connected and are all keys to building this covenantal society. So even though the roots of the words are different, for sure, listening, Shema, and joy, simcha, are connected. Um, Harris, I'm curious if you want to share. You certainly don't have to, but um, do they feel connected for you in your practice? Oh wait, can you unmute? Oh yeah, sorry, you're still muted. There you
Okay.
go.
Um, yes and no. So at one point, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs mentions that um, simcha is the joy we can only have when we're with other people. It's not a single, it's not a solitary joy kind of thing.
Hmm.
Uh, and so, and then when I think about Shema, to listen, I think more about hearing and being open to whatever comes to us. When we listen normally listen to something, or we listen for something. When we hear, we're more open. And sometimes there's something about being open to hearing and being open to the joy that's there, even when it's not obvious. So that was the connection I was sort of making myself.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, there are a number of different words in Hebrew that can be translated as joy. Simcha is one of them. And I actually have never heard that idea, that notion that simcha is only something that is like a available in vis-a-vis ourselves and another. Um, I have to explore that, to be honest. I'm curious to learn more about that because in my experience, whatever we call it, let's say whether it's simcha or osher or chedva, again, there are a number of different words that potentially could be translated as joy. In my mindfulness practice, cultivating that experience of joy in a very, typically in a very subtle way, is a key thing that I'm doing.
Mhm.
I'm training and orienting myself towards this moment, this breath, this step, this feeling in my body with a quality of joy. Um, so it's interesting, and I think certainly my teachers often said, don't take my word for it. Check it out in your own experience. So these things are these things are important to explore. And as always, the language can get in the way, and the language is intending to really point us towards our human experience, as opposed to like, oh, what is simcha? Like I need a taxonomy of the experience. Like that can be helpful, but most importantly, from the perspective of our practice, we're really inclining towards experience. What are we actually feeling? Um, so yeah, so we should check it out. Um, thanks, Harris. I'm so glad I asked because the spell check wasn't cut. It took us in a different direction. Um, that's great. Another question. You started with describing the Sefer Devarim as different. I thought you were going to say peculiar, but you didn't go in that direction. Please expand on different. Different from what? So the book of Deuteronomy is different for a number of reasons, and this is different scholars coming from different perspectives understand this differently. Why it's different, what's behind the difference, and certainly, you get a lot of different perspectives on that. But I'd say, broadly speaking, the difference is that Deuteronomy is largely a retelling of things that already happened. So, for example, in next week's Parsha, next week's Torah portion, Moshe is going to describe the experience at Sinai and is going to say the Aseret Hadibrot, the 10 utterances, the 10 commandments. There are differences in how they're told in the book of Deuteronomy and how they're told in the kind of when it was happening, which we read about in Parsha Yitro in the book of Exodus, Sefer Shmot. So Moshe is retelling the story largely, and actually the rabbinic title for the book of Deuteronomy it was often called Mishneh Torah, which means the retelling of the Torah, or like a second Torah. It's a different quality because Moshe is telling it, and so sometimes we find differences in how things happened. Another great example is with the story of the scouts, the Meraglim, which are sent into the land, which we read about in Parshat Shlach Lecha. And now when Moshe retells the story, oh, we sent messengers, it's different. There are differences, important differences, and our sages have noticed those differences and have raised them up. And so Sefer Devarim is, and I think, again, I'm really relying on Jonathan Sachs. I think it's such a brilliant analysis that it's really about, okay, you're going to go in the land, into the land. I'm not going to be with you, says Moshe. I'm not going to be able to go into the land with you. You're building a society, and here's how you do it. And so there are some things that are brand new, that mitzvot, commandments that are brand new in Sefer Devarim that we haven't heard before. Those are primarily dealing with the realities of building this new society, this covenantal society, as opposed to the laws that we had earlier, which were more about how do you navigate this being in the wilderness kind of experience. So there are a number of things that are different about Sefer Devarim. Biblical scholars, like academic biblical scholars, typically see it as primarily being a different author, even. If you're interested in that, lot that you can find is pretty interesting. Yes. Next question. Mary says, listen and love are verbs. Is that significant, especially in that joy is not? Great question. Those first three terms, I didn't give specific examples, but part of what's striking is that these words are used so much, you find them in different formulations, sometimes in verbal form, sometimes as nouns, and applied in different ways. But the important thing is that they really are a kind of recurring trope that seem to be not peripheral, but really at the core of the mission of Sefer Devarim, which again is building a covenantal society. So in the shorthand kind of list that I put up, you're right, absolutely, listen and love are verbs. But, for example, with joy, one of the examples is, it says, V'samachta b'chagecha, you will rejoice in your holidays. So there it is a verb. And maybe it would have been more consistent to put them all as verbs there, perhaps. But very close reading, Mary. I love that. Great. So from Lori, as we head into high holidays, how do we bring listen, love, feel joy to our Yom Kippur ritual, longing and self-reproach, request for forgiveness? Great question. My sense for this is that these foundational practices, listen, love, feel joy, by training in really deepening our capacity for feeling these things and orienting ourselves towards our lives with these qualities, informed by these qualities, they will prepare us for other work, for other questions. The calendar is such a profound teacher, and the season of the high holidays has all these different steps, and they have different qualities within them. Sometimes they're sort of subtle, and sometimes they're pretty different. There's a flow amongst them, and I'm sure we'll be talking about that as we go through it in these daily sits and in other environments as well. But my sense is that there's a foundation that's built by these kind of foundational practices like we were talking about today that equip us really well for the honest looking and truth telling and examination that we're called to do during the season of the Yamim Noraim, the high holidays. It's a kind of a foundational practice that sets the stage. That's kind of my first sense for it, but I would really encourage you to check it out. For example, on Yom Kippur, when we may be asking our deepest, most honest questions about ourselves, how might that be different if we're really holding it with a significant dose of love, self-love, of love towards our world and the people around us, and even with the quality of joy. The sages talk about Yom Kippur being a day that actually has joy within it, because there's a joy of the promise, the possibility of teshuvah, of recalibration. So it may seem like these qualities that we were talking about today may not be at home in the high holidays, but I think they are. Certainly they will inform how we do that other work in significant ways. Beautiful. So many good comments here. Yes. Please say more about remembering being an activity in the present. Yeah, it's interesting. If I'm thinking about what happened last week, of course, my mind is drawing on things that happened in the past, but the experience of remembering is taking place in the present moment. And the same is true with when we're anticipating something in the future. What's going to happen when, I go to that, new job or whatever it is? What's going to happen tomorrow when I show up there? We're orienting ourselves towards a different time, past or future, but that orienting, that remembering, or that anticipating is taking place in the present moment. And so, and it's influencing and impacting how we're experiencing the present moment. So memory, zechira in Hebrew, is an essential part of mindfulness, actually. There's a lot more to say about it, something I'm very interested in. But it's something to explore in your own experience. How does memory, when I remember, the remembering is taking place right now. I'm drawing from something that took place in a certain kind of way, and it's influencing how I'm experiencing right now in this moment. Amazing. There's so much more in this beautiful chat that we're not going to get into today. But really grateful to all of you for being here together. I'll be back next week at some point on Tuesday during Tisha B'Av. And we'll practice then. Another day that has a certain kind of quality of experience, and we'll practice with it then. But I hope you all have Shabbat Shalom, and that we look forward to reconnecting again in the not too distant future. Again, thanks, Andrew, for your help on tech today. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.